Hello and welcome to All Things Breastfeeding. I'm Barbara Robertson, and I'm joined again by my Lacta Learning co-founder Nancy Moorbacher. Hey Nancy.
Hey, Barbara.
So there was a study that came out recently that caught our eye, and we thought we needed to kind of discuss this because I think there's a lot of misinformation about this study and what we actually know about this subject and what do we not know about this subject. So talk about what came out recently.
Well, there was a paper that appeared on uh, a website. It's called BioRxiv,
Mhm.
and it's a place where unpublished manuscripts in the health sciences are published.
Mhm.
But it was not peer reviewed, and it's not actually it hasn't appeared in any publication.
Okay.
So it doesn't really meet the criteria of a kind of study we would use to change practice.
Right. And what was it about? What were they looking at?
Well, interestingly, I actually talked to the researcher a couple of years
Mm.
ago, and when he was kind of investigating into this, and it was about, uh, many of us have helped families where there's stored milk, and when the milk is taken out of the refrigerator or freezer, it has become either soapy smelling or tasting, or rancid
Mhm.
uh, smelling or tasting. And he was telling me that, in his family, this was a major issue for them. So he wanted to investigate about the potential effect of lipase
Mhm.
on human milk and learn more about it, because this is something that people have talked about for many years. We
Right.
have theories about it, we have thoughts about it, but nobody's really researched it. So I thought it was sounded like a fabulous idea.
Well, right. And so, up until what, 30 years ago, we had some people who pumped milk for their preterm babies and very
Mm-hmm.
sick babies, but
Mm-hmm.
really pumping and storing milk was not a common activity. We
No,
just didn't have good enough pumps for it
we did
and
not.
until the mid 90s. And then all of a sudden we did get personal use pumps that we could do it. So this is something, I mean, it's a relatively new idea in the world of humans.
Yeah,
Um,
having to deal with the
yeah.
effects of storing milk. I
Hmm.
mean, there was a floating milk bank. The first milk bank in the US was in, I think it was 1911, but that
Hmm.
was all hand expressed milk, and it was
Right.
fed directly to babies. There wasn't a lot of storage involved.
Hmm.
So yeah, the storage of human milk is something that's become really paramount in many families' lives these days, because
Yes.
it's, they say, 90+% of nursing parents are expressing milk. So it's become a
Right.
very important subject.
Right, because either they're going back to work or whatever. Maybe they had a
Well,
baby who
yeah,
never latched. So lots and lots of different
there's a
situations.
lot of reasons that families express milk.
So tell me what lipase is. What is lipase? People talk
I,
about it. What is it?
it's an enzyme that breaks
Mhm.
down the fat in the milk. And so the thought was that it's the lipase that's breaking down the milk fat and causing it to turn soapy smelling
Mhm.
and tasting. That was the original thought about it. And so it was interesting when I wrote my book, Working and Breastfeeding Made Simple, I wanted to learn more about experiences. And so I put out a Facebook survey, and I got a lot of responses. I got, maybe 100 responses of different people's different experiences. And what I learned from reading what they wrote was that they oftentimes, with some of these mothers, because everyone that I heard from were mothers in this survey, they, it would take a different length of time for their milk to develop this taste or smell. So
Mhm.
it might be still while it was in the refrigerator. It might be, after it had been frozen for a period of time. Sometimes it would take a long time of freezing before they'd start to have this issue. This isn't really a problem if the baby accepts the milk,
Right.
but when a baby rejects the milk, and the parent smells it and it smells or tastes funny, then that becomes an issue. Like, what do you do about that? And so that was a problem that I addressed in that book.
Right. And what are some of the things, if you do discover that this is an issue, what are some of the things that you can do? Because you might have a freezer of a
Right,
1,000 ounces.
right,
And many babies take this milk without complaint, by the way.
right, right.
Many
And it's
babies don't
perfectly
care.
safe. I mean,
Yeah, it's
there's
perfectly safe.
even though it may smell or taste funny, it's actually perfectly safe. And
Right.
that's something that this article we're going to be discussing also confirms.
Right.
But if
Now,
the
so
baby
what do we
won't accept
do?
it, yeah. So what you could do is you could try mixing it with fresher milk.
Mhm.
And then you could gradually use up the stored milk. That way, every baby's different. So you'd have to experiment to see what percentage of the milk would need to be fresh, and how much of the stored milk, the baby will still accept. So it might be half and half. It might be a
Mhm.
third, two thirds, it could be any ratio, but that's one possible way. Another thing that I would always make sure families knew is that this milk is perfectly suitable for donating to a milk
Yep,
bank as well. If you
exactly.
decide you don't want to use it or you don't want to deal with it, that's another possibility. But
Yep.
oftentimes, what happens when a lactating person discovers that their milk is doing this with some over storage time, is it's often been suggested that they should scald the milk before they store it, because the
Mhm.
thought was that that would deactivate the lipase in the milk. So scalding means you heat it up to a point where there's bubbles around the edges, but it's not boiling. So,
Mhm.
the question is, well, does that reduce some of the nutritional components in the milk? And the answer is yeah,
Yes.
probably, but
Mhm.
it's still, going to be better than giving formula if that's the alternative.
Right.
So a lot of mothers would, like, for example, some of the mothers in my survey, they told me, well, my milk takes 4 or 5 days to turn. So, I could use the milk I pumped every day during, or maybe it took 3 days, like during the work week. But then on the weekend, I would have to scald that milk for
Mhm.
Monday because I knew that it would turn. And so, people were, you know, figuring out what worked for them and their family. So there's a lot of variables there.
Right. And, from what I understand, it's basically the lipase is doing some pre-digesting, breaking
Right.
down the
Exactly.
fats. And
Yes.
that's one of the reasons why the hydrolyzed milk, is that the right word that I'm using?
The hydrolyzed formula.
Hydrolyzed, yeah, formulas, they smell bad because they also have this
Uh,
they've broken down the protein, so they're more
uh-huh.
easily digested for the
Uh-huh.
babies and cause less,
There you
so that
go.
smells even worse than regular formula.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And so that I think that's an interesting piece.
Mhm.
Um, oh gosh, what was I going to say about that? There was one more thing. Well, there have been a lot of theories as to what is happening with this process. And so talk a little bit about, because when you were doing the working and breastfeeding book, you got very interested in this.
Mhm.
You did your
Mhm.
survey and you
Mhm.
did research on what information there was about the
Right.
situation.
When I was putting together Breastfeeding Answers second edition,
Mhm.
what I do is I look and see what the sources that I trust are saying. And what I discovered, like, for a time, the Human Milk Banking Association of North America in their guidelines were saying, oh, well, if it smells soapy, then that's a lipase issue. But if it smells rancid, then it's what they called a chemical oxidation issue.
Mhm.
And they used someone who was an expert in food storage on that. But then when the next edition of their guidelines came out, that was completely gone. I don't know why.
Mm.
Um, and with the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine was interesting to me because when their protocol about human milk storage came out, they basically said that they didn't recommend scalding the milk.
Right.
But then again, they didn't really address in it, what do you do if the baby rejects the milk?
Mhm.
There weren't any suggestions for that either. So I thought, well, that's easy for you to say.
Right,
Don't
right.
scald the milk, but you're going to have to give these families something to go on,
Yeah,
if this becomes a problem for them.
yeah.
So I was a little disappointed in that. I mean, okay, you're entitled to your opinion, but this really is an issue for a lot of families.
Yeah, there have been several theories, but honestly, we're still not sure. And one of
Mm-hmm.
the things that's
Right.
interesting is that a family that seems to have a lipase issue with one baby may not have it with the next
Yeah.
baby. They may
Mm-hmm.
not have it throughout their whole lactation
Uh-huh.
experience for one baby. And there were theories about depends on what you're eating. There was a theory for a
Right.
while that
Right.
if you had well water with high mineral
Right.
content. So talk about some of those ideas.
Well, that actually came out of the chemical oxidation I was
Right.
talking about
Hmm.
that was promoted by the Human Milk Banking Association of North America. And
Hmm.
so the guy who was an expert on that basically said, well, if you do have chemical oxidation going on, probably what's happening is either someone is drinking well water, or maybe they're taking I'm thinking it was like vitamin E. There were certain
Hmm.
vitamins that might
Hmm.
also cause that, or eating certain kinds of fish.
Right, I
might be a
remember
factor.
correctly, the fish.
Um, right. So there was a lot of thought about that. And I was contacted by a number of women who, were struggling with that. And they
Mhm.
would change their diet and they would say, don't drink tap water,
Yeah,
drink bottled water because there could be some minerals in the tap water. So it got to be very, very involved.
yeah. Well, and yeah, we just want to make things simpler, not more
Yes,
complicated.
absolutely.
And unfortunately, again, we're not entirely sure on this.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a new theory that's being put
Mhm.
forth by this author. So talk about
Yeah.
what they were saying about what's their theory and what are they
Yes.
thinking?
Well, the article itself is reporting on a survey that he did
Mhm.
with 1,049 families
Mhm.
who were represented. They represent all the states in the United States, and was asking them questions about their experience with expressing milk. Some of them were exclusively breastfeeding, some of them were mixed feeding, some of them were formula feeding. But anyway, what he found out was that actually they said 26% of them either occasionally or regularly had issues with their baby accepting the milk,
Hmm.
which I thought was interesting.
Okay.
All of this, it looks like a study, but he was also talking about some um, analysis he did of human milk. And he talked about the theory that he developed that actually it isn't a lipase issue.
Mhm.
And he developed a product. And this is the part I think that is important to understand, that this article is really the precursor to the release of a product. He says at the very end that several patents have been applied for this product. So the purpose of this article, I think, is to create a market need for what he's producing. Now, his
Hmm.
theory is that it really isn't about the lipase levels in the milk, and no one has ever really looked at what is a regular level,
Right.
a
What is
reference level,
normal
what are low
lipase?
levels of lipase, what are high levels. Nobody knows the answer to any of that at this point. This was all just a theory to start with. But
Mhm.
he's saying, no, it's probably not about the lipase, although he does admit at the end of the article, he didn't even look at lipase in his
Wait, so he
research.
didn't even measure lipase measure milk
No,
levels in the
he
milk.
did not. He did
So
not. And
he has no
basically say,
idea.
right. So
Okay.
basically, like I say, this article, the purpose of it is to set the stage for the release of a product. And he's trying to create a market need. So what his theory is that, and some of this is definitely true, is that in human milk, there are what's called milk fat globules. And
Right.
so these are not necessarily mixed in with the other fluids. They have a membrane, these milk fat globules. And what he was suggesting is that when milk is frozen, the crystallization of the milk causes these membranes around the milk fat globules to break, and that opens it up and allows the lipase to interact with the fat more easily.
Hmm.
Now, that does sound somewhat logical, but the thing is, those of
Sure.
us who have been doing this for a long time know that the milk doesn't necessarily have to be frozen for these changes
Right.
to take effect. So,
This
but
this
that,
is a huge problem
yeah,
with the yeah, his
yeah. So,
theory.
so his theory is basically it's really not about the lipase; it's about the milk fat globules and the membranes and what the freezing does. And so he's developing an additive that you put into expressed human milk that is designed to help to stabilize it so that it will not turn in terms of taste and smell over
Hmm.
time. So
Hmm.
he's found two ingredients that he's saying are in this product. One of them is ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C, and that he's correct that after storage, vitamin C content goes way down in human milk. The other ingredient is pectin, which is comes from green plants. It's an ingredient in infant formula, and the World Health Organization has considered it safe. And he says the pectin, the purpose of the pectin is to help keep the milk fat globules intact for longer. But again, the need for this product depends upon his theory being correct, and we're not
Hmm.
really sure that that's the case.
So yeah, pectin is used to stabilize jams and things like that.
Right.
So the idea that it
Right.
would stabilize
So
these
it's,
fats is sure. And
oh,
acid we know stabilizes things as well, increasing the acidic content to things.
yeah, both of these products, the ascorbic acid and the pectin, are used in foods currently, and they
Right.
are considered to be safe. Are they safe for babies under 6 months of age? Who knows?
Yeah.
There is like ascorbic acid, as I say, is normally in human milk, But is I guess the bigger question is this theory, his theory about what's causing the changes in the milk, correct? And I don't think we know the answer to that question.
Well, I heard people talking about that it also has to do with our frost-free
Right. And
freezers.
he mentions that. He
Yeah,
mentions
so tell
that
me
in
about
his
that.
article.
Mhm.
So with when we have these self-defrosting freezers, I don't know if you remember, you probably don't. I'm old enough to
No,
remember.
I do
Back
remember
people
Nancy.
people had to actually manually defrost their
Right.
freezers because you'd have this buildup of ice crystals inside.
Yes.
But the current freezers, both the deep freezes and the refrigerator freezes that many of us have in our homes, they are what's called self-defrosting. So what that means is there is a natural thaw and defrost cycle that occurs through that. So there's a temperature variation that happens, and he says that this variation, this thaw and refreeze that goes on in
Mhm.
these appliances is contributing to the milk turning,
Hmm.
which
Because it gives more opportunities for
right,
the ice crystals to develop
right,
and
and then thaw out,
yeah,
right,
and rupture, I guess, disintegrate
right,
the membrane.
rupture the globule
Yeah.
membranes,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Well, and that was interesting. I was talking to Lisa Marasco about this.
mhm.
And I said, well, then what about your regular food in frost-free refrig and freezers? And she said that's why people have deep freezes. And I was
Yes.
like, oh, interesting. I just had never really thought about it.
Well, the deep freezes, I mean, they have this feature as well because you
Yeah.
don't have to defrost those either. But the
Yeah.
difference, I mean, the reason why many people prefer the deep freeze for milk storage is because there's not a lot of opening and closing of the door every day like you do with your refrigerator freezer. And so
Mhm.
there's less of a temperature variation, but they still have these cycles because you're not manually defrosting those either.
Yeah. It's very, very interesting. Well, and
Yeah.
this is why, they say when you're storing milk, you want it back in the deepest part of your freezer so that
Mhm.
it's less affected by temperature
Temperature change.
variations.
Right.
And at the human milk banks, they have thermometers and they,
Mhm.
measure the temperature every day to make sure
Mhm.
everything's staying very cold.
Yeah, but I have no doubt that this person is probably, his name is Justin Silpy, that when he goes to present this to the marketplace, there's going to be a lot of mothers, and other nursing parents who are going to be very interested in, preventing this problem
Mhm.
in their milk, even maybe before a problem develops. So I'd say there's probably going to be a large market for it. But again, its effectiveness really hinges on his theory being correct that it's not related to lipase. And I'm not sure that we really know the answer to that.
Well, and his data that said what, 26%,
Yeah,
24% of
26% of them reported that their babies sometimes, like, could be occasionally or regularly were refusing express milk.
what do you think about that number, Nancy? I'm thinking about my practices and all the families I've worked with. And
Mhm.
honestly, it's less than 5%.
Yeah, I think maybe the way he phrased the question might make a difference. Like I say, this
Yeah.
whole survey was designed to create a market need for the product he's developing. So it
Mm,
might be that he asked a question like, "Does your baby ever refuse a bottle?" You know,
right. And
which
that
is
has
a
nothing
whole
to
different.
necessarily
It
do with
is
the
a whole
milk.
different thing
Yeah.
than knowing that the milk has changed, taste and
Right.
smell.
Right.
He might have made it a little bit more general than that. He did not list the actual questions that
Oh,
he
he
asked.
didn't have the questions listed, the survey
No, he did
questions.
not. He did
That
not.
would be very
And
interesting.
this is one of the reasons why peer review is important when you look
Mhm.
at an article, because obviously peer reviewers would probably want to know more. It would be
Well,
pretty
yeah,
obvious from reading this article that he's trying to promote a product, and they would be looking into it a little bit more closely.
and in some ways, God bless him. He's interested in solving a problem that
Right.
some people do have.
Hmm.
However, the fact that he didn't even measure lipase
Right.
levels to begin with,
Right.
so did he actually solve a problem,
Right.
is hard to say. And I hate the idea that people will be, tampering with their own milk, trying to prevent a problem they may not even have.
Well, heaven knows, there's so much anxiety,
I know.
in new mothers and other nursing parents tapping into anxiety is not challenging at all.
So, for all of you who are listening, basically keep in mind this is a theory. and it hasn't been proven.
Mm-mm.
And this person's out to make money.
Right.
And so we really have to take this not with a grain of salt, but a whole spoonful of salt,
Hmm.
and keep an open mind and kind of see how things are developing. As Nancy said, for me, I'm just like, well, who are the people he found to send this survey to? How did he find them? Why these people? If you're sending out 1,000, why not send out 100,000? And this 26%, what were the problems? Because that sounds very high to
It
both
does sound
Nancy and
very high.
I.
Yeah, it does. I
And
agree.
so, but if he's trying to sell a product, yeah, he would want it to seem higher, so the markets would
Exactly.
seem larger.
Exactly.
And parents are already so worried about the quality of their milk. Do I have enough milk? And then if I'm going to pump, is it going to go bad because that's all over the internet?
Yeah.
And so it's playing into people's fears, and that really
Right.
bothers me.
Mhm.
So we wanted you to be aware before you get too excited. We're going to say, hang on, and let's wait for some more evidence.
Yes.
Um, because the fact is we don't know much about the subject of lipase,
No.
and this sounds very definitive,
I
yet
mean,
he
we know
didn't
there's
even
lipase
measure
in milk,
lipase,
but is it the lipase and is the soapy smell and the rancid smell, are they two different processes?
right?
We really, really don't know the answer. And as I was saying the other night to the students in our learning lactation specific
Hmm.
95-hour course, it's there's just the more you learn about lactation, the more you appreciate how much we really still don't know. And I'm always so grateful anytime any new information comes out because
Right.
there's
It's
so many
interesting to see.
areas that we really need to know more.
Right. So we're very happy that he's looking into this, because people need to. But we have more
Mhm.
questions that need to be answered before we can start recommending a product.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Nancy, for joining us. And we'll have a link to the study. The title of the study was what, Nancy? Do you have that?
I do have it somewhere. Let me see.
So hang on for a
Here
second.
we go. It's
Yeah.
called food derived compounds, extended shelf life, frozen human milk. Extend the shelf life of frozen human milk. And the author's last name is Silpe, Silpe, and his name is Justin. His middle initial is E.
Yep.
So,
And we'll
but
have a link to that on our podcast page as well. But you can also just type it in and look it up and you can find out more information.
again, this is an unpublished manuscript that has
Right.
not appeared in any journals and has not been peer reviewed.
Okay. But the lactation community is talking about it. So we
Right.
thought we should get in there. And I knew that once Nancy took a close look, she could share the facts about it. So thank you, Nancy, for doing that.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to All Things Breastfeeding. If you are enjoying our podcast, please tell your friends and have them listen as well. And thank you so much for listening.